Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to break down what is, without a doubt, one of the most aggressive and psychologically devastating openings in all of chess, the Vienna Gambit. If you're looking to completely drag your opponents out of their comfort zone from literally the very first moves of the game, well, you are definitely in the right place.
Let's just dive right in with a massive statistic pulled straight from the Lichess database. Honestly, this completely answered my question as to why this opening is an absolute must-learn, especially if you're a beginner or intermediate player who just wants to absolutely dominate with the white pieces. 60%. Seriously. When you pose the ultimate question to your opponent on move 3 by initiating this gambit, white goes on to win a staggering 60% of the time. Now, if you play chess, you know that is an insanely high win rate, and it all comes down to the immense, suffocating pressure this setup puts on black right out of the gate. So here is our roadmap for today. First, the core strategy explained. Second, the Vienna Gambit accepted. Third, the Vienna Gambit declined. Fourth, surviving the main line, and finally, dictating the board. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the core strategy explained, deflecting the center. So, by definition, playing a gambit means you are willingly giving up a pawn for free. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would we do that? Well, because the positional compensation you get in return is just completely overwhelming. The whole goal here is to sacrifice a little bit of material to deflect black's central pawn, and doing that allows us to build this unstoppable center and grab a massive lead in development. The starting sequence is super simple, but it is incredibly deadly. We start off with the standard king's pawn moves, e4 and e5. But then, on move 2, instead of bringing out our king's knight, like basically everyone else does, we develop our queen's knight to c3 to protect our e-pawn. And when black responds naturally by bringing their knight to f6, which is known as the Falkbeer variation, by the way, we immediately strike at the center with f4. Boom, the trap is officially set. And looking at the setup after move 2, it's actually pretty fascinating. Unlike the standard King's Knight opening, what we're really looking at here is a delayed King's Gambit setup. It's an idea that actually dates way back to the 1800s. It was created by the Swiss government official who apparently just spent all his free time absolutely dominating the local chess cafes in Vienna. So, the really crucial takeaway here is that by move 3, white is forcing black to solve a massive problem. We are completely ripping them out of their comfort zone, and we're dictating the pace of the game. Black is left staring at this terrible dilemma. Do they get greedy and take the free pawn, or do they try to awkwardly defend their center? Which brings us to Section 2, Vienna Gambit accepted, punishing the greedy opponent. Okay, so the exact moment they take the bait and captured on f4, we immediately push our e-pawn forward to e5. And suddenly, black's nicely developed knight on f6 is under direct attack, and it has literally nowhere safe to jump in the center of the board. Every single escape square is already covered by our pieces. Depending on how black reacts here, things get pretty tricky for them. Surprisingly enough, their objectively best move is actually the most humiliating one. They just have to admit defeat and undevelop their knight all the way back to g8. Now, if they try to be clever, maybe they try to pin our e-pawn with their queen, well, we just play a symmetrical queen to e2 to unpin it. The threat is still there, and they're forced to do that exact same walk of shame back to g8 anyway. And the end result? White is left with a massive developmental advantage. As the sources for this explainer so enthusiastically point out, when black accepts the gambit, you are essentially setting up this flawless, detail-oriented trap. I mean, your opponent is literally dancing to your tune. And in a lot of these lines, if they aren't incredibly careful, they might even blunder their queen or just get straight-up checkmated in a handful of moves. Now let's move into Section 3, Vienna Gambit declined, squeezing the cautious opponent. So what if they play it safe? Well, since our f-pawn is directly threatening their center, they're forced to make these really awkward defensive moves just to protect their e-pawn. The most common rational attempts you'll see are them moving their knight to c6, their bishop to d6, or just pushing their pawn up to d6. But here's the secret. None of these are objectively good for black. So here is our exact tactical blueprint for whenever they decline. If they try to defend with their knight or bishop, we simply capture their central e-pawn. Then, we push forward with our d-pawn to hit their pieces all over again. We are basically forcing their knights to just jump around uselessly. After that, we develop our king's knight to f3, which crucially stops any of those really annoying queen checks on h4. We castle kingside, and then we launch a devastating attack right down the newly opened f-file using our rook. We are just slowly suffocating them. Moving right along to Section 4, surviving the main line, the educated opponent. But what happens if you face someone who actually knows the theory? They're going to play the main line, pushing their pawn to d5 on move 3. Let's be real, this is the absolute hardest test of the Vienna Gambit. But the good news? Early chess data shows this only happens in about 8% of beginner and intermediate games. When it does happen, though, it requires some pretty precise memorization on your part, just so you don't end up getting crushed.
But hey, instead of panicking, we're just going to follow a strict sequence. First, we take their e-pawn with our f-pawn. Black is naturally going to recapture our center pawn with their knight, which drops a really powerful centralized piece right onto e4. We respond immediately by sliding our queen over to f3. This little maneuver is called the Paulson attack, and it's designed to directly challenge that strong knight of theirs.
The whole secret to surviving this main line is really just categorizing Black's 3 likely attacks. If they decide to trade knights, you just capture back with your b-pawn to build this totally impenetrable center wall. If they attack with the knight, you either pin it or capture it. But if they just try to defend with a pawn, well, here is a crazy move for you. Queen to g3. This directly attacks g7, it totally locks down their dark squared bishop, and it essentially permanently prevents them from ever castling. Honestly, it is so deeply rewarding to play.
All right, let's wrap things up with Section 5, dictating the board, controlling the pace from move 2.
The Vienna Gambit really isn't just about catching people in cheap traps. As you can see, it's about confidently taking a quiet, standard opening and just instantly transforming it into a wild, highly tactical midgame. Because you're playing white, you know the plans, you know the pawn structures, while your opponent is basically just left guessing, which usually means they're making critical mistakes by like move 5 or 6.
So the very next time you sit down with the white pieces, ask yourself this. Are you content playing a quiet, predictable, boring game? Or are you ready to sacrifice a pawn, embrace the absolute chaos, and completely shatter your opponent's comfort zone by move 3? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.